Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Good morning. This is Mark Charles. It is Friday, May 27th, and I'm sitting down, my bluebird flower mug, drinking my second cup of coffee. This week has been a chaotic week, and I've had some great, fantastic guests on my second cups of coffee, and we've had a lot of really good discussions. But I wasn't planning to do a second cup of coffee today, but I thought as I sat down that I was just going through my morning. I thought it would be really good to get on just to kind of take some time to exhale and to share a few thoughts that I've had over the past week of what has been going on within our nation. So that's what I'm going to do this morning as I drink through this cup. But before I begin, I want to do as I always do by acknowledging the people whose land I'm living on. And so I moved with my family from the Navajo Nation almost over 7 years ago now, almost 7 years ago, and we live in Washington D.C. And these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor and thank the Piscataway for being the hosts of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands, and I just want to state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So, yeah, my Piscataway relatives. So, as you remember, a week ago, actually, it was a week ago Friday, I was in Buffalo, New York, and I took some time to go there because there had been this horrific white supremacist Christian nationalist terrorist attack um, at a grocery store there, and it targeted the Black community, and 10 Black people were killed, and it was horrific. And I wanted to respond in a very, very practical way, and wasn't just enough to sit here and lament or to even just pray. I wanted to do something very tangible, and so I decided to drive there. So I drove there last Thursday, and I got there Thursday afternoon, early evening, spent the day there, and then spent Friday morning as well, and came back. I left early Friday afternoon. I didn't have a lot of events scheduled there. I wasn't planning to do any sort of major presentation or anything. I didn't even have a real agenda. I have a few friends there. A friend of mine named Breck, who is the pastor of a church called Renovation Church. He very much kind of hosted me and helped me have a few conversations and spent some time with me. But yeah, I was mainly just kind of there to be with people, and I had no agenda. So I basically I got there and I went down to the grocery store and I just stood in the street and kind of looked at what was going on, watched how the people were responding, and it was interesting. It was a very kind of thoughtful moment for me. That night, that first night on Thursday night, my friend Breck had dinner at his house and gathered a few people together. All in all, there were maybe 7 or 8 of us there who showed up. We just had some pizza and wings, of course, since it's Buffalo, and we just sat there and talked. We talked about my book. We talked about the event of Buffalo. We talked about the systemic nature of all of these things. And there were 2 African American pastors and leaders there. There was 2 members from a pastor from the Latinx community, Breck, who pastors a multicultural church, and then there was 2 white pastors who were there. And everyone knew each other, but we all just had some really, really good conversation. And then the next day, I went back down to the grocery store and just kind of observed. There was a coffee shop there that I grabbed some breakfast at, and actually met someone who follows my work and was living in the area. And I just kind of announced on social media I was going to be at this coffee shop for breakfast, and so he came down and joined me for a cup of coffee. We had a chance to talk there, and I got a chance to talk to the owner of the coffee shop and get just a feel for that community. And then I just walked around outside. Um, and then I met my friend Breck for lunch again before we left, and we went to a pizza place or a taco place called Lloyd's, which apparently it used to be just a taco truck, and now they have a brick and mortar building. And so we grabbed lunch at the taco place called Lloyd's, which was quite good. And while I was there, two people stopped me and, "Are you Mark Charles?" And "Yes, I am. Thank you so much for coming and being here. I've heard you lecture here. I've seen you here." Happened twice to me at that restaurant. And I think what I was struck by was I wasn't doing any presentation. I wasn't lecturing on anything. I wasn't doing anything publicly. But people were grateful that outsiders were coming in and not trying to make a show or not trying to do anything outlandish, but just being there and being present. And I was really struck by those responses. It reminded me a lot when I was on the reservation, where things would happen or people would come to the reservation and they would want to do these great bold acts of charity, or these really, they'd want to do these really kind of showy things. And I'm trying to tell them, we just need people. If you really want to come, just come and sit with us, grab a cup of coffee, and let's just talk, right? Let's just not do anything for the camera, not do anything publicly. Let's just sit and talk and have dialogue. And maybe that dialogue will lead to deeper dialogue. And maybe those dialogues will lead to the building of an actual relationship. And then it's out of those relationships that we might actually be able to foster some sort of systemic, long-lasting change. And that was my hope in going into Buffalo, was not to do anything bold in public, but just to be there, possibly have some conversations, and then to do what I could to foster those conversations and develop those dialogues and hopefully develop some relationships out of that. And so my visit there was the goal was to just be present and gather a few thoughts, to be there in the moment, and then to be able to respond better in the future by returning and continuing those dialogues that were started when I was there. And I felt really good. I felt good about that. I felt like it was a good. It was a lot of driving. It was 7 hours each way, so 14 hours of driving in 2 days. I was driving almost as long as I was in the city. Not quite. I was probably in the city for about 24 hours, and I was driving for about 14 hours, 15 hours with stops and bathroom breaks and eating, maybe 16 hours. Anyway, but I was coming back, and I was thinking to myself that that was really a worthwhile way to spend those 2 days. And I was really grateful for that because it gave me time to be present. The drive gave me time to reflect and think, to talk to some people, even over the phone as I was driving, and with my hands-free earpiece on, of course. But yeah, it was good, and I was coming back grateful for that time and looking forward to kind of sharing more in depth about it on my social media over the next few days, Monday and Tuesday. Um, and then, of course, so on Monday, I actually had a really good conversation with Terry Wildman, who's doing some fantastic work with a Native American translation of the Bible, and that was actually a really good dialogue we had here. And then this shooting in Uvalde happened. And any capacity to reflect deeper on what just happened in Buffalo flew out the door. And now we have this, right, less than 10 days later, this horrific mass shooting in Texas. And I remember as I was reading the headlines, I landed on one of the articles, one of the headlines that was written by CNN. And I should know better. I warn people about this, not to go to these propaganda and news outlets like Fox News or CNN, because they're only going to piss you off. That's the whole goal. But I ended up on this article. I forget where I found the link to it, but it was an article by CNN, and I was reading it. And one of the people they interviewed was a senator, I think, from Texas, who was immediately saying, we're not going to take this dialogue, this event, we're not going to allow this event to increase gun control. And right, this is because this is the partisan screaming that happens, and of course that pissed me off as it was intended to, and it just added. I mean, as you watch social media, just this screaming starts going on back and forth. And what was different this time about both what happened in Texas as well as what happened in Buffalo is when the events happened. In the past, I've been very intentional to create a space for lament and to create a space to just kind of grieve what's gone on as these tragedies have taken place. And I noticed in myself, my first instinct when these events happened was, okay, we've been lamenting, right? I've lamented events like this numerous times over the past 2 decades of my life, right? I mean, the day after the shooting in Texas was the second anniversary of the public lynching of George Floyd, right? Which we've lamented. And I felt this something burning inside me of like, yeah, it's not just, we have to begin to work towards change. We have to begin to do something different. We have to work. We have to fight for this change that we need in our nation so desperately bad. But what was challenging was what happened in Texas didn't allow the space for me to continue to gather my thoughts about what happened in Buffalo. I was just beginning to have some of these thoughts come together a bit more fully, and boom, Texas happens. And the partisan screaming starts happening. And I remember I sat down that first night and I wanted to put something out. And it was just, I was looking at social media and people were just screaming at each other. And I thought, what can I possibly say that's not going to just add to the screaming? And I talked about this in the live stream I did with my friend Leroy Barber. I think that was on Wednesday that we did that one. And I talked about that, and you can go back and watch that. But I was already beginning to think, okay, if I'm going to create space to grieve, the purpose of the grief is so that we can get to meaningful action. And what is the meaningful action? And if you saw my tweet this morning, actually I did this last night before I went to bed. I want to share this with you in my thing. I was thinking about what the screaming match going on between the left and the right, which is about gun control. And if you want to trigger white people, just talk about gun control. No pun intended, but it will just get them screaming at each other. And I tweeted last night, I said, the right to bear arms necessitates levels of maturity and responsibility the USA has yet to demonstrate it possesses. And if you've heard me speak before on this, and you've listened to me both during my campaign as well as in my writings and in my lectures, you know about the critique I have of the 13th Amendment, which is, it defines perfectly the left and the right screaming phrases of each other. I'll put this up on here now so you can see it. Right, the 13th Amendment, essentially it's 2 clauses, or 4 clauses, but 2 major parts. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So again, this is the left and the right. A well-regulated militia, this is the left stance. We have the right to regulate these guns. And then the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So this is the screaming match that happens that's been happening on our social media for the past 5 days, past 20 years. But anyway, this is where their screamings come from. And the problem is nobody is talking about how these two ends of this argument are both rooted in racism and white supremacy. No one's talking about that, right? A well-regulated militia. When was this written? Well, this was part of the Bill of Rights that was added to the Constitution when it was literally adopted. So the 1780s and 90s, right? This is 1787, the Constitution was adopted. So this amendment is coming in right then, after the Revolutionary War. Well, what do they need a militia for? They've just vanquished their foreign enemies. What do they need a militia for? Well, they need a militia for two things: to capture enslaved people who ran away, and to protect their borders, their frontier, from the merciless Indian savages. That's why a well-regulated militia, a civilian army, is necessary for the security of a free state. The two major threats to their security are enslaved people who might either rise up or run away, and merciless Indian savages who want to protect their own lands. And then we have the second half. And of course, right, so this is the left stance. So when we go into even the modern era politics with the code words of law and order, and then the work of Bill Clinton to finely tune Abraham Lincoln's vision of mass incarceration for people of color, right? So we have this militia, which has now become a police force, incarcerating people of color. And that's the left stance. The right, which says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, this is, again, 1787. The people. Who is the people? The people, as defined by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, is white men, and as implied by voting laws, is white landowning men. The Second Amendment does not exist to give the right to bear arms for everybody. This is why the NRA doesn't advocate for people of color when something happens and a person of color is caught with a gun. This is why they're much more adamant about white people and much less adamant about people of color, because the Constitution, the amendment, wasn't written to protect the rights of people of color. It was written to give white landowning men the right to bear arms. This was clear, right, in the 1960s when the Black Panthers decided that this amendment might somehow apply to them. And they armed themselves and began policing the police, watching as the police arrested or pulled over Black people, reminded them of their rights, and stood there with their guns to make sure that nothing got out of hand. And then in protest, they marched into the state capital of California with their guns. And they weren't doing anything wrong. There was no law against it. They were arrested, but they couldn't be detained because they weren't breaking a law. Soon after that, there was bipartisan legislation, gun regulation in California. Why? Because, again, the point of the amendment wasn't to allow people of color to keep and bear arms. It was to allow white people. This amendment is rooted, dripping with systemic racism and white supremacy. Now, if you've read my edits to the Constitution, you will notice that I did not put a strike-through font through the Second Amendment during my presidential 2020 campaign. I took out the racist, sexist, and white supremacist statements of the Constitution. But I did not do that for the Second Amendment, not because I didn't believe it wasn't white supremacist, but because I knew that debate would be much bigger. And it wouldn't be something that could be accomplished as nearly as quickly. So I wanted to address that after my first 100 days in office. But as I watched what happened, and it's not just Uvalde, Texas, right? It's not just Buffalo, New York. It's this repeated actions of our country to refuse to step up to the plate and act responsibly, or demonstrate a value for human life. And instead, it clings to this constitutional right to bear arms, even though it means killing innocent people over and over and over and over and over again. And so my thoughts these past few days has been, this amendment needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. We need to just remove it from the Constitution, right? Which is why I tweeted this last night. The right to bear arms necessitates levels of maturity and responsibility that the U.S. has yet to demonstrate it possesses. We do not have the responsibility or the maturity as a nation to have a constitutionally protected right to bear arms. We don't have it. And we've demonstrated that over and over, and both in how the amendment was written, rooted in racism and white supremacy, and second, in how it's played out over the past 250 years. With us as a nation refusing to act on behalf of the vulnerable who are losing their lives repeatedly. And so, yeah, the having a right like the right to bear arms, the right to possess a deadly weapon, necessitates a level of maturity and responsibility, not just for the individual, but for the country, the nation that holds this law, to be able to create an environment where the value of life is upheld. If you're going to give your citizens the right to arm themselves with deadly weapons, then you need to do something as a nation to communicate a value for life. And we've demonstrated we do not have the maturity or the responsibility that is necessary to have a constitutionally protected right to bear arms. So we just need to take it out. We just need to remove it from the Constitution. Guns should be treated like cars. You can buy one. Got to get a license. Got to pass a test. Got to get your license renewed. If you misuse it, you lose the right to have it. What about the government? Shut up. Say what you really mean. What about people of color? Don't pretend. Don't dare pretend that your passion to keep your right to bear arms is to protect you from your government. Don't pretend that. It is to protect yourself from people of color. That is why your forefathers wrote that amendment. That is why you cling to hold on to this right. Stop pretending. This is the work we have to do, my relatives. This is the work we have to do. Our nation does not possess the responsibility, the maturity, or even the value for life that is necessary to have a constitutionally protected right to bear arms. We do not possess it, as we've demonstrated, not only twice in the past 10 days, 12 days, but as we've demonstrated over the past 250 years. Let's go back 500 years to when Doctrine of Discovery was written and these lands were discovered. So these are the conversations we have to have. But neither the left nor the right are going to give you this discussion. Neither the left nor the right are going to give you this conversation. They're going to exacerbate the screaming match. They're going to heighten the tension. And media is going to do the same thing because that's what sells their papers and their clicks and everything else. They're not interested in the dialogue. They're not interested in change. They're interested in profit, their bottom line. And the two parties are interested in keeping the status quo. So we have to have this dialogue at a national level, at a very, very deep level. And we need to make foundational level changes. And that's the work I've been trying to do. That's the work many other people have been trying to do. And we need to continue to press this conversation forward by being more direct, by being more honest, by pointing out people's lack of integrity to engage in these sort of conversations. And we have to be honest, we have to find a way to be persuasive, right? We live in a democracy. Actually, we live in a democratic republic. And debate is how we bring change. Persuasion is how we bring change. Not through violence, not through control, but through debate and persuasion. And so we need to find ways to bring about the debate and to be persuasive. And that doesn't mean we win every debate. But what it means is we help people to understand what it is they're advocating for. What it is they're standing for. We live in a country where you're allowed to make a choice. We need to be clear and stop pretending that the choices are what we're being told they are. They're not. They're very different from what we're being told they are. I didn't think I intended to say all of this today. Obviously, these are my thoughts, and I'm kind of just, as I said, I'm taking some time to exhale and just to express some of the things that have been on my mind these past few days. And there's a lot more we have to talk about, right? There's a lot more we have to bring to the forefront. But this is why I share my second cup of coffee with you. This is why I stream these things on my social media. This is why I put these things out on my Twitter and my Facebook and my Instagram. This is why I started my Patreon page, to find ways so we can have a platform that's not dependent upon the media, to engage this conversation. That's literally what I'm trying to do. That's my goal of this, and I appreciate everyone who has joined me in this journey. And let me look through some of the comments here and see where people are. I know I've been kind of talking without looking much here for the past several minutes. Phil Fox, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining today. Shantina, hello. Donna, thank you for joining. Steve Wilson, thank you for joining. Mary, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for being here. I see there's a few other people whose names I don't recognize. Safri Marie, thank you for joining today. I really appreciate everyone who's taking time to sit in on this conversation and join some of this discussion with me. We have a lot of work to do. And as I said in my conversation on Wednesday with Leroy, grieving these losses is a part of that work, right? I'm not equating grieving to the meaningless thoughts and prayers. No, grieving, recognizing the loss, acknowledging the pain of that loss, and expressing that, grieving. Because if we don't grieve, we move into a state of denial. And that allows our anger to be more central. And when we act out of anger and denial, those actions are frequently destructive. So grieving is done. We need to grieve these things and acknowledge how we're feeling and express ourselves so that we can have healthier reactions and responses and more meaningful actions down the road. But that doesn't mean we just thoughts and prayers and we say our little lament and then we move on as if it was dealt with. No, it's not. We have a lot of work to do, my relatives. A lot of work to do. And grieving will allow us to take better, more intentional, and healthier steps moving forward. So anyway, I hope some of these thoughts are helpful. I want to let you know a few things that are coming up on my schedule. So next week, I'm going to be in Prescott, Arizona. And on June 4th, so a week from tomorrow, on Saturday, I'm speaking at the Museum of Indigenous People in Prescott. They're opening a special exhibit called Broken Promises. And they've asked me to come and be the speaker to open that exhibit. And so we'll be there. I believe the start time is 1 p.m. Arizona time. And the museum charges an admission, but there's no additional charge for the event. So if you can get in, when you get into the museum, you'll have access to attend the exhibit opening and hear my speech. I don't think they're going to live stream it or record it, but if they do and it becomes available publicly, I'll definitely let people know. But I'm very excited to be at this event and to talk about, and my topic is going to be how the doctrine of discovery lays the foundation for a legacy of our nation's broken promises. And I'll be looking at not only treaties, but looking at how our government treats treaties, especially with Native nations. So that will be coming up next week. Also, through the end of the month, if you purchase a signed copy of my book, Unsettling Truths, from my website, and I'll put a link into my comment right now, but for every copy of Unsettling Truths that's purchased from my website over the next, through the end of the month, I will be donating $5 to support the families of the victims in Buffalo, New York. So far, I think we've sold 11 books from my website since that tragedy happened. So I have $55 set aside. After the end of the month, I'll tally up all the sales that happened on my website and make a donation to somehow, very practically support the families of the victims of that white supremacist Christian nationalist terrorist attack in Buffalo, New York. So if you have been waiting to purchase a copy of my book, or if you have friends or family who would like a copy of my book, now is a good time to buy it. I haven't increased the price of the book. They're $20 for a signed copy of the book, and I will be donating $5 for every book I sell to help the victims of the families. The last thing I want to, well, there's two other things. One other thing I want to share is, if you like what I'm doing and you appreciate these dialogues, I welcome you to subscribe to my work on Patreon. I started Patreon a few months ago because I was looking for a way to build my platform and grow my platform. And by starting Patreon, I'm able to offer different tiers and different benefits at different tiers. And one of the benefits I offer, so one of my tiers is the Join the Conversation tier. And members, subscribers to that tier is $20 a month. Have access to, I live stream a different lecture, a new lecture every month. And so I've done lectures on American exceptionalism. I've done lectures on other topics, the trauma of white America and things like that, and those are archived there. Which, if you subscribe, you'll get access to those lectures. But this month I'm doing my presentation is on reflections from my 2020 presidential campaign for all the people, and I'm going to be talking about kind of things I've learned, my experiences of that campaign, and what did I take away from it, what was successful, what was not successful, what are challenges that still need to be met. And so I'll be doing that. I changed the date and time of that lecture. I was supposed to do it today at 1 p.m., but I moved it until tomorrow because I wanted to make it more accessible to people. And I think people might have more time on the weekends than during the day on the week to join that lecture. You can, if you subscribe, you can watch the lecture both archived, or you can join it live. I do it through a Zoom call. So either way you'd like to do that. And then finally, if I started a 2020 Unsettling Truths book tour, and I've had my first event in New York City. I had another event we had to postpone that was in Buffalo because one of my family members got sick and I wasn't able to travel to Buffalo. But I do have other events. I'm trying to reschedule the event in Buffalo. I'm also I'm in the process of scheduling an event in Rhode Island, as well as another, not Buffalo, Portland. Sorry, I canceled the event in Portland, and I'm working to reschedule that. I am scheduling another event in Buffalo, which hopefully will happen in June. And then I'm scheduling one in Rhode Island, which might happen more in the fall. I'm also going to be driving this summer with one of my daughters from DC to California. We're going to go visit my family in New Mexico, and we're going to visit my wife's family in California. And along that drive, I'm actually driving. My wife is going to fly and meet us there because she has not much time off work. But I'm going to be driving across the country, and I'm going to be doing this book tour along that drive. So we're hoping to drive kind of out that way by going through some of the more northern states, or the central states, and then hopefully I'll come back by going through the south, and again all the way to LA, and then coming back here to DC again. And so if people are interested in helping me set up a book tour event, please DM me. Reach out to me, let me know, and if we can work it into that drive across the country, I would love to set up events along the way during that drive to talk about the book, to get copies of the book into people's hands, to promote it, and to really help continue to grow the dialogue around Unsettling Truths. If you would like to financially support that book tour, I started a GoFundMe where you can donate to it, and I'm using those funds to help fund the travel, to help fund the promotion. If there's money available, to pay myself a modest stipend for the time invested in that for each of the events. But I'm mostly doing it to help get the expenses of this covered, because I don't have a big promotional engine behind me. So yeah, we're going to be driving across the country and trying to engage dialogue about Unsettling Truths. So that will be coming up as well. Anyway, I'm excited about the stuff that's happening. There's a lot of things going on, and we need to deepen this conversation. We have to address things at a foundational level. And I thank you for joining me for my second cup of coffee today, to take a few minutes to exhale, to share some thoughts, and to find the energy to continue to move on. I haven't been able to do a sunrise this past week, which has been very unfortunate. I felt like I've needed one, but it's been very cloudy and rainy this past week. Tomorrow and going into the weekend and into next week, we're supposed to have several days of sunshine. So if I can't do a sunrise in the morning on Saturday, I will. I think I'll definitely be able to do one on Sunday. And so I will. I am really looking forward to going back along the Potomac and watching the sunrise. And of course, I live stream those. You're welcome to join me for those as well. That's another fantastic way to exhale. I can't have my relatives. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you have a fantastic day and a wonderful weekend. Walk in beauty, and may we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakonet.